So Ricky Gervais is a British comedian, which I can't say I've watched any of his works or seen any of his shows, but he's an individual who is actually in line with kind of new atheism. I would classify him like this. And recently I'm not sure how long this video has been up there, but I came across this video, which was the second, if not the most viewed atheist video online, or the video with an atheist title. And this is a video where he's having a conversation with one of the American interviewers, and there's a bit of a discussion about God and the existence of God. So we wanted to just quickly do a reaction video to that and see if some of the interrogations that are put forward by Gervais are in any way, shape or form legitimate. Let's take a look.
So, Ricky Gervais, why is there something instead of nothing?
That makes no sense at all.
You have to answer my question.
That's not the two choices.
So the first thing he says was, why is there something rather than nothing? These are not the only two choices. Well, actually, these are not choices at all. These are not choices at all. This is a question. It's not giving you, is it this or that? Because a choice usually is separated with the word or. And why something rather than nothing is not an illegitimate question. You say it's not about why, but how. Well, if you say it's not about why and how, that would necessitate that you're starting with a presupposition which is nihilistic. In other words, you conceive the world as meaningless or purposeless. And by that, you say that why questions are meaningless. Very similar to like 1930s positivists or even verificationists who posited the same kind of claim. This is a very weak understanding, because if this was the case, then lots of things which would be meaningless. If this is the stance you take, if this the positivistic stance, many things would be meaningless. Metaphysical things, logical things, mathematical things. So the idea of why questions being meaningless is something which has been thoroughly refuted in the philosophical literature. But the question of, it's not why, but how. Okay, the question of how. So how is there something rather than nothing? It's still a legitimate question, but you haven't done any good job in trying to answer it. You've tried to, any question about why is there something wrong, one of the most foundational questions should be at the forefront of your mind. Why is there something at all? Why is if it's not a good question, I wouldn't know why Albert Einstein would ask this question. It's about the explicability of the universe. But was he an ignorant person? Was he someone who didn't know? So once again, I think that you're trying to brush aside some very important and heavy, meaningful and purposeful questions, ultimate questions, as Karl Popper put it, in order to try and scramble away from those kinds of thoughts in your mind.
Is there a prime mover? Is there a demiurge that started everything?
Well, outside science and nature, I don't believe so.
So he says outside of science, I don't think there is a prime mover. What does the word outside of science mean? I mean, outside of science is mathematics. So do you think that science is omniscient, that science can explain everything, that through it everything is known? So then metaphysics is out the window, logical precepts are out the window, mathematics is out the window, outside of science. There's many things that are outside of science. In fact, the scientific method is outside of science itself. The scientific method the scientific method which science depends on is outside of science. So what are you talking about? What is this phraseology outside of science? It's just new atheist vomited regurgitations, which frankly are fruitless and futile in the face of actual argumentations, debate, and discussion.
Atheism is only rejecting the claim that there is a God. Atheism isn't a belief system.
So he says atheism isn't a belief system, it only rejects that there is a God. Even if we grant that, so what? What does that do to the discussion? I mean, whether you want to classify atheism as a religion, as a belief system, as an ideology, or as a lacking, as it's defined, of belief, who cares? At the end of the day, these are all semantic points. I don't care what you think atheism is or what you think being an atheist entails. The question still is legit. Why is there something rather than nothing? And if you don't want to answer why, how is there something rather than nothing? Don't run away from that, okay? With all due respect, don't run away from the question. How means, definition of how is by what means? By what means can there be? May there be? Is it conceivable for it to be? Or for there to be something rather than nothing? You haven't answered that question. The interviewer, I don't know why he just jumped from one thing to another. Clearly, he was deterred by the confidence of this comedian, But he should have stuck to his guns. He should have said, you know what? No, sorry. How is there something rather than nothing? That's a question. It's a legitimate question. You saying I don't know would have been sufficient, but don't pretend you have some information that you don't, or try to be strident or positive about it. You don't have an answer. That's it. If that's what it is, then that's it. Don't pretend that you're someone who's got anything to offer in this discussion. Literally, if you say I don't know, that means you have nothing to offer in this conversation.
You deny one less God than I do. You don't believe in 2,999 gods, and I don't believe in just one more.
He says if there are 3,000 religions, I only deny 2,999 gods. I only deny one more. Okay, well, how many men are there in the world that could be your father? Wait a minute, you're trying to... Yeah, this is no joke. This is no joke. I mean, maybe you can explain, because you're... Sorry to say, how many men could be your father? How do you know that your father is your father? Now, you could say, oh, I can go and do a DNA test, but have you done that? I mean, that would be scientific, yes. And for it to be truly scientific, you'd have to do the test yourself and see the results yourself, and not dependent on any testimony, by the way. Not the testimony of the people who do the DNA test. For it to be truly perfectly scientific. But how do you know your father is your father? You know through inference to the best explanation. Wait a minute. Inference to the best explanation. So the circumstances of you being alive in the time you're alive, and you know, and your father being in the house, or if he wasn't in the house, whatever it was, you know. Or how do you know your mother is your mother? Same thing. I mean, were you there when you were coming? Can you remember? Can you recollect? Can you think about the time when you coming out of your mum's womb? Yeah, I don't think you can think about that. I don't think you can remember that. So how do you know your mum's your mum? See, there are maybe 1 million people or 1 million human beings, women, that can be your mum, and you reject 999,999 of them, and you believe in only one. So that's the same argument. It's exactly the same argument. You're saying I reject 2,999 gods, and I only reject one more. Okay, that's true. So how does that prove that God doesn't exist? How's that an argument against God's existence?
If we take something like any fiction, in any holy book, in any other fiction, and destroyed it, okay, in 1,000 years' time, that wouldn't come back just as it was. Whereas if we took every science book, right, and every fact, and destroyed them all, in 1,000 years, they'd all be back, because all the same tests would be the same result.
That's good. That's really good.
He says if we destroyed science books and holy books in 1,000 years, the science would be the same, replicated, but the holy books won't be the same. Actually, if you destroy all the Qur'ans in the world, the people would have still... Because the Qur'an is a memorized book. It's an orally transmitted book. So actually, I don't think it would be gone if you destroyed them. You destroy them all now. People memorize them from 1,400 years. So this is a very weak understanding of the preservation of the Qur'an, or the oral transmission of it. Maybe you could argue that with other religions, but you need to be specific, because Islam is, you know, a major world religion, as you know, and so your argument doesn't actually cut it when it comes to Islam. Moreover, and probably more problematic for you, is that you said if you destroy all the scientific experiments, they'll come back in 1,000 years. That's a weak understanding of the philosophy of science, with all due respect, because as Karl Popper mentioned, you know, there's the principle of falsification, which has been criticized in the literature, but putting that to the side, there is no... Science is not incorrigible. It's not something which is meant to produce eternal truths. See, you seem to bring in this, what was referred to as scientism. Scientism, with the idea that science can explain everything. This is nonsense, and that is some kind of incorrigible eternal truth. That's nonsense, and everyone knows that's nonsense. We know that's nonsense from our experience with the coronavirus. The science was changing on a weekly or monthly basis. People were telling us the science says this, the science says that. The politicians were telling us these things, and the investigations were differing, because the sample size was growing, and the information was changing, and the theories were moving around. So science is not incorrigible. Science is by nature, because of the problem of induction, is something which can be falsified at any time. For you to think that 1,000 years, all the investigations that we do today are going to be the same in 1,000 years' time, shows me that you have a superficial understanding of the philosophy of science, with all due respect. Yeah, and the same thing applies with your understanding of the religious scriptures. So put all of this aside. We're calling you, to worship one God. That's what we're calling you to, which is, there's an innate predisposition to believe in the one God. Justin Barrett Dr. Justin Barrett, who is part of the Oxford Anthropological Society, who's run a study in 2011, refers to this as a innate receptivity to believing in God. We're naturally inclined to believe in a higher power. You know, the majority of people in the US believe in a higher, but 90% of people, even the irreligious ones, believe in a higher power. It's a natural, only 5.5%, according to Linda Woodhead, 5.5% of the British public are strident atheists like yourself. You're in a minority. I'm not saying that means anything, but what I am saying is sociologically, people find it natural, even with the absence of religion, to believe in a higher power. It's a natural thing. It can be argued from first principles. And so to try and dismiss it as if it's some kind of ridiculous concept, though it's so pervasive cross-culturally and historically, psychologically, and in every single way possible, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself. And I think you're just regurgitating and vomiting out the same new atheist dogma that you probably had taken from your master Richard Dawkins. And I'm afraid you're going to have to start thinking critically for yourself, because it's clear that your arguments are a cut and paste job, and they're not even that well refined as a cut and paste job from the new atheist rhetoric. So I would say be more open-minded. Start thinking deeply about 3 questions. I'm going to ask you those 3. You might think that they're meaningless questions, but I'm going to put these 3 questions to you, Ricky Gervais. I'm going to put those 3 questions to you. And this is, before you go to sleep today, I want you to think about those 3 questions. And don't say, no, it's meaningless and science. This is nonsense. We've disproven it. And it's not even philosophically robust. The 3 questions are, where did I come from? And think about not just yourself, but the universe itself. Where did the universe come from? What are the options? Either it came from nothing or something. The universe either came from nothing or something. We're saying it came from something, right? And there's no infinite regress. So where did I come from? Then what am I doing here? Yeah. So, what is your existence? And then where am I going? You're gonna die. I'm gonna die. And you got to think about what's going to happen after that. If you're wrong, you're in trouble. And you are wrong. And you are wrong. And you will be in trouble. But it's not too late. You listening to me right now, Ricky Gervais, is actually the best thing that's ever happened to you in your life. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.